Okay, so we're going to look at the conceivability argument, which Descartes uses to back up his dualism ideas. So, first of all, what I want to do is try to categorize the following into those that are inconceivable because logically impossible, and those that are conceivable. So you got round pyramids, alcohol-free whiskey, all the way down to a cold-blooded cow, the Earth having two moons. So what I suggest you do is that you just pause the video and just have a go. Which do you think are conceivable and which are inconceivable? Okay, so hopefully you've started the video up again. And now, so for example, let's go through some of these. Vegetarian haggis, yeah, it's conceivable. Okay, now you could have alcohol-free whiskey, that's conceivable. A flying horse, now is that conceivable or inconceivable? Well, it's conceivable, you know. Now, I'm not saying flying horses exist. Nobody is saying that flying horses exist, but they are conceivable. You know, we have Pegasus. A wooden horse made exclusively from glass. Well, that's not conceivable because there's a contradiction there. 5 being less than 4. Well, there's a contradiction there, so that is not conceivable. J.K. Rowling being the same person as Banksy. Well, that is conceivable. Really, really unlikely and probably not, but it's still conceivable. There's no inherent contradiction in that particular statement. So, you know, conceivability, it's important to make the point. We're not saying, philosophers are not saying that's the way the world actually is, and this is evidence. So we're not saying flying horses exist because they are conceivable. Is there any inherent illogic contradiction between in the statement and with a flying horse? There is no inherent contradiction. Okay, we don't have flying horses in this world, but it is possible to conceive of them. There's no contradiction about that. And so when we talk about within this world, we talk about the universe. Now scientists talk about parallel universes. So we could conceive of a parallel universe in which there are flying horses, or a parallel universe in which there is life on Mars, or a parallel universe in which the Earth has two moons. But there cannot be a parallel universe in which 5 is less than 4, because that's a contradiction. You can't have a parallel universe where you have round pyramids, because it wouldn't be a pyramid then, would it? So, because it's a contradiction. Okay, so we're looking what is conceivable, not necessarily what is actually taking place in our world at this moment in time. So here we got things that are physically possible, all the ways the world could have been consistent with the laws of physics. Okay, so that is the way we see the world now. And you got the logically possible, all the ways the world might have been consistent with laws of thought. Okay, so there's no contradiction there. And within there, you have metaphysical possibility. Okay, metaphysical possible and logical possible tend to occupy the same space. Anything that is physically possible is also going to be logically and metaphysically possible. Okay, so let's just try and sum this a little bit up. I'm not trying to prove, take flying horses, I'm not trying to prove that flying horses exist in this world. All I am suggesting is that it is conceivable that in another world that they could exist. There is no contradiction in the idea of a flying horse, where there is if I'm trying to say 5 is less than 4. There is a contradiction there. So no matter what world we look at in the infinite worlds, 5 will never ever be less than 4. It is inconceivable. So that's the important point. We're not necessarily describing this world, we're just looking at what is conceivable, what is possible. So Descartes said, first, I know that if I have a vivid and clear thought of something, God could have created it in a way that exactly corresponds to my thought. So the fact that I can vividly and clearly think of one thing apart from another assures me that the two things are distinct from one another. That is, that they are two. since they can be separated by God. Never mind how they could be separated, that does not affect the judgment that they are distinct. Essentially, he is just simply saying that if you can think clearly, vividly of two separate things, and therefore they can be separated by God. Therefore, there are two separate things. That's all he's saying. But then he applies it to the mind and body. So, my mind is a distinct thing from my body. Furthermore, my mind is me, for the following reason. I know that I exist and that nothing else belongs to my nature or essence except that I am a thinking thing. So this is the cogito ergo sum. From this it follows that my essence consists solely in my being a thinking thing. Even though there may be a body that is very closely joined to me, I have a vivid and clear idea of myself as something that thinks and isn't extended, and one of body as something that is extended and does not think. So it is certain that I am really distinct from my body and can exist without it. And when he's using the word extended, what he is saying is about you occupying space. So he's saying, essentially, he's saying his mind does not occupy space, where our body does occupy space. So there's a difference between the two. The body is not a thinking thing, where our mind is a thinking thing. There's another difference between the two. So therefore, it's metaphysically conceivable that we have vivid and clear ideas of two separate things. Therefore, it's conceivable that they can be separated. Therefore, they are two separate substances. That's where he's going with this. That's why we were talking about conceivability earlier on. Okay, so that is kind of his main argument. Now he's applying Leibniz's law to this whole process, and we'll come to that in a moment. So we can sum up his premise, his argument with that paragraph of this argument. First premise: if I can clearly and distinctly conceive of the essential natures of two things separately, it must be metaphysically possible to separate them. Premise 2: I clearly and distinctly perceive myself to be essentially a thinking and unextended thing. Premise 3: I clearly and distinctly perceive my body to be essentially an extended and unthinking thing. Conclusion: it must be metaphysically possible for mind and body to be separated, meaning that they are distinct substances. So premise 2 and 3. 2, he's just simply saying his mind thinks and it doesn't occupy space. Premise 3, his body does not think and it does occupy space. Therefore, they are essentially natures of two things, and it must be metaphysically conceivable and possible to separate them. Now, obviously, not everybody is clearly happy with this. And what he did, he put this out to his peers at the time and said, okay, and he invited them to comment on his ideas. And the first one we're going to look at is what is conceivable may not be metaphysically possible. I know it looks a bit maths. And premise 1 is the first premise we're going to look at is if I can clearly and distinctly conceive of the essential natures of two things separately, it must be metaphysically possible to separate them. Now, Anton Arnold challenges this premise by using the example of Pythagoras' theorem, and this is what he says about the whole thing. Okay, so he makes an argument which is clearly wrong. Okay, he's making the point that this argument isn't going to work. But he's using Pythagoras' theorem that the square of the hypotenuse of a right-angled triangle is equal to the square of the other two sides. So there you got the big square is equal to the two smaller squares. That's Pythagoras' theorem. He points out that someone ignorant of the proof of this theorem might well suppose that they could conceive of a right-angled triangle that lacked this property. But it wouldn't follow from this that it is possible for a right-angled triangle to lack the property. Indeed, this would be logically impossible. So it is inconceivable, metaphysically inconceivable, to have a right-angled triangle where the square of the hypotenuse isn't equal to the square of the other two sides. It's logically inconceivable. Now, the only way you could conceive of it being different is if you don't have all the information and you've misunderstood the information. And that's really what Arnold is saying. He's saying simply conceiving something as metaphysically possible does not make it correct, because you just may be wrong in your thinking or incomplete in your thinking. So this objection works if Descartes' conception of mind and body are incomplete. And that's Arnold's challenge to him. He's saying, Arnold is basically just saying, look, you can think and you got a body, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they are of two separate substances and that they can be separated. You might not have all the information, and you might just simply have misunderstood the nature of the mind and the nature of the body. Now, Arnold and Descartes didn't know about subconscious thoughts at that time. So, in the 20th century, 21st century, now we understand a little bit more about subconscious thoughts. It backs up Arnold's viewpoint even more. Descartes did not know everything about the mind. So, let's give an example here. We have a clear and distinct vivid perception of heat and a clear perception of motion. Okay, we see them as two separate things. You can say they're two different substances. So we can conclude that they're different. And normally in ordinary life, we don't have a problem saying that heat and motion are two very different things. But that isn't the full story, is it? Because if you go down on the atomic level, then we actually find that heat is simply the atoms in motion. So in one sense, heat and motion are the same thing. In one sense, it's a fuller picture. For us to say that they're two totally separate things which can be separated would be wrong. And that's what Arnold's point is making. We don't have all the information. Now, a couple of arguments Descartes came back with. I have an idea of my mind as a thinking thing. I have an idea of my body as a non-thinking thing. Conclusion, therefore, my mind and body are different. I have an idea of my body as an extended thing. I have an idea of my mind as an unextended thing. Conclusion, therefore, my mind and body are different. Now, at first glance, this is Leibniz's law, isn't it? If there is something different between two different things, that you've got two different things. Okay, you only need to have one atom that is different, then it is two different things. Okay, it's not exactly the same. And Descartes is making the point that the mind and the body are two different things. And so people refer to Leibniz's law and say, look, proof. There you go. But Leibniz's law doesn't work when we are talking about intentionality. And that's an exception to Leibniz's law. So if I make a difference, there was in Greek mythology one of the ships sailed around the world. Well, it sailed around the Greek area for quite a few years, and it had a crew, and then off it went. It got involved in storms, got involved in battles, and over time, planks of wood had to be changed, and they had to cut down trees to replace little bits of the boat. And then some of the crew came to an island, and they settled there, and they had to replace, and some were killed in battle, and they had to replace. A few years later, the boat comes back. Is it the same boat that left? Well, no. Leibniz would say no. As soon as the first plank of wood was swapped for a new plank of wood, it is now a different thing. It is not the same boat. Okay, but when it comes to intentionality, Leibniz's law doesn't work. Intentionality contexts those that involve a belief in something. Okay, that's what we're talking about when we talk about intentionality, a belief in something. Now, Descartes has a belief in the true nature of his mind and body, but they don't reveal the true nature. Simply having a belief about something doesn't reveal the true nature. They're just beliefs. He is committing what is called the masked man fallacy. So this is premise one. My idea of Batman is of a masked crusader. My idea of Bruce Wayne is not of a masked crusader. Therefore, my conclusion is going to be Batman is not Bruce Wayne. Okay, these are my beliefs, but clearly they are wrong. Bruce Wayne is Batman. But you know what? Batman doesn't have to be Bruce Wayne. There were times in the stories where Jim Gordon, the commissioner, put on the bat suit, and Robin took on the bat suit. Okay, but normally we sort of think Bruce Wayne is the masked crusader. So the reason why this doesn't work is because we're talking about our beliefs. Okay, we believe the idea Batman is a mass crusader. My belief is of Bruce Wayne, he is not of a mass crusader. Therefore, the conclusion Batman is not Bruce Wayne. It doesn't work. Okay, because it's about beliefs rather than about facts. Okay, so the second response. Metaphysical possible tells us nothing about the actual world. Now, if we accept dualism, then it still tells us nothing about the physical world. Really? If we accept dualism is metaphysically possible, then so is physicalism. So physicalism is the idea that the mind and the brain are one. They are not two separate substances. So, in one sense, conceivability doesn't necessarily take us any further down the argument about what is the mind, because we can use conceivability to justify dualism, but also physicalism, two opposing arguments. We cannot use, all of this means we cannot use a priori reasoning. Remember, this is reasoning without experience to analyze our concepts of our mind and body. We can work out metaphysical possibilities, but not physical ones. So we can essentially what it's saying is that we can sit down and we can come up with all sorts of metaphysical possibilities and conceive a whole load of stuff, but doesn't necessarily mean we can empirically go out there and get the empirical evidence to back those things up. And not physical ones. Okay, so what is metaphysically possible? It doesn't actually tell us anything about the actual world. We need the empirical evidence to back up what is actually happening. Otherwise, it's just a belief. Okay. If we take it like it's metaphysically possible for there to be flying horses. Yeah, it's metaphysically possible. Does that tell about the actual world? Well, unless I have empirical evidence that there are flying horses or there are, no, it doesn't. I need that empirical evidence to underpin the metaphysical possibility. Last one, mind without body is not conceivable. Out-of-body experiences require senses for you to see your body and to occupy space. There's lots of examples of people with out-of-body experiences, and I think in the last lesson I showed you a short video clip of this woman who said she had an out-of-body experience, but the problem is it's not conceivable really, because if she's looking at her body, well, she needs eyes. Where is she within space to actually observe all of this? So it isn't conceivable. People would argue it's not conceivable actually to have a mind without a body. David Hume always argues that knowledge comes from our sense experience, but we are never aware of anything which corresponds to the self and conscious experiences. The idea of an immaterial mind is a thing which is not a possible object of experience, lacks any meaning for Hume. So, I mean, this comes down to the idea about when he was talking about that sense of self, that, we just have a stream of consciousness. There is no sense of self for us to have a sense experience of. What he's saying. Without a body, it is impossible to identify one person from another. Our body defines us. Who we are, our relationships, how we view ourselves, all of that defines us. Whether you're black, whether you're white, whether you're seen as culturally attractive or not attractive, whether you're seen as you fit in or you're weird looking, or whatever it is, our body defines who we are, and then that defines how we interact within the world and with other people, and also who we're attracted to or not attracted to. So a mind without body isn't conceivable for a lot of people. So now we've been through an awful lot there actually, and that would probably quite a few lessons normally if it was in school. So I've just skimmed over the top. So what you need to do is just go, I've just tried to explain it briefly, and I hope I've made some sense of it. Essentially what we're talking about to begin with is that the whole conceivability argument isn't proof that something exists. All we're saying is it conceivable? Is it possible? Okay, and if it's possible, then we need to show that there is no contradiction. And what Descartes is trying to do is show there's no contradiction by saying his mind is thinking and not extended, and his body is the opposite. So therefore, there must be two separate substances, and that sounds quite plausible. And then we have the responses to that argument. Okay, that's the end.